Hello, media planning and buying students. My name is Mike. As you know, I'm recording our lecture for this period because I'm not able to make it into class. So you'll see that. I'll send a link to this. This is just to keep us on track with everything. So we're gonna do this today, so you can watch kind of at your leisure over the weekend, or even hopefully just over the class period today. Would probably be the smartest way to do this. I'll keep the content to around a half hour. Um, but my hope is that we'll stay on track so we can just kind of be focused on Thursday. So here is kind of what we're doing today here via digital lecture. Of course, attendance is not going to happen today, but we will have a catch-up day on Thursday for all research reports. So if you haven't done that yet, get ready. We're going to spend a fair amount of time just tackling that. I've left a fair amount of time, so we're going to tackle a fair amount in this lecture today, just so we have free time on Thursday to not only do the research report outs, but also to meet with your teams. Today, first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about Chapter 10, and that's evaluating the media plan. That's CATS Chapter 10, so you should strive to read that in conjunction with this video, because on Thursday we're going to have a reading quiz on that chapter, reading quiz number, I think, 8 or 9. And then today I'm going to wrap up by showing you a couple project review examples. And then I'm going to show you an example of a plan that I pulled together, one of the many plans I pulled together for Briggs & Stratton and the Home Generator Systems projects. For this week, you should read CATS Chapter 10 and, of course, also Young Chapter 12 to stay on task with everything. As you know, Assignment 7 is due. That's an individual project, so that's due. So you want to bring a printed copy of that on Thursday, because you'll have some time in class to review that with your teammates, and that's where you can compare notes and kind of make connections, hopefully, with some of the research you've been doing during the course of the semester. Like I mentioned, reading quiz 8 is on Thursday also. That's on Chapter 10, so you want to read that and get through that. We'll administer that in class as well on Thursday. So we'll catch up on Thursday with our research report out, so we'll get pretty much everybody caught up. And then I wanted to share this quickly with you guys as well. These are the 4 student examples I'm sharing with you guys from last semester, which I think are good. Now, the only one of these 4 here, Monster, Lulu, Bud Light, and Little Caesars, that has a paper associated with it is the Monster Energy one. I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much stuff, but I think the Monster Energy project is a pretty good one in general. So a high watermark for you guys to think about, but a good example, something to throw darts against. Of course, all of these are pretty good, so take a look at those. One thing I wanted to mention that's not probably in the handouts is that I'm also looking for a calendar, a year-long calendar. And we'll talk more about budget and stuff like that as well, but these are good examples, I would think, for you to look at. Some quick hints for you guys as you begin to plan in earnest for your final projects. Of course, the supporting document is meant to be kind of a deeper dive, right? The presentation is a high level and teasing out sort of the key moments or things that you want to talk about from a strategy standpoint. So really go into some detail on the robust data. Remember, we've talked about how to write both a narrative summary, also using data. So we want to kind of have a combination of those two. And we'll talk more about that next class period as well. But robust data is key. Formatting's up to you, I'd say, but a lot of students tend to grab elements of the brand and point not only their PowerPoints, but also their papers with consistencies that will help format. Now, I would say this: be consistent for sure. Either way, whatever you choose to do, same theming, colors, and imagery in both the presentation and the support document is critical. So make sure you do that. Obviously, I'll say this, and I don't know if I say it anywhere else, but obviously you want to watch typos as well. That's a big bugaboo for me. So if you have a typo in there anywhere, you can expect to probably lose some points. This is a pitch after all, and that's not a good way to start off a conversation or a relationship with a client if you've got typos in either your leave behind document or your paper or your presentation. The best PowerPoint slides usually have very few words, if any. So what you don't want to do is have a written narrative paragraph and just read from that. So there's 3 of you guys, generally speaking, I think in most cases here. You'll want to turn and talk. So, look at a PowerPoint bullet point rather, point, and then you want to make, conversation around that for each slide. But, less is more in a lot of cases there, and be able to explain the strategy. If you choose to use primarily pictures in your PowerPoint, that's great. Then be extra certain to fully explain what each image is supposed to be communicating in the supporting document. So make sure there's a connection and a flow. That's the other thing. It's kind of harkens back to 110 when you've taken 110. They talk about transitions, and that's vitally important to any pitch. So anything you've learned in 110 is important here. Quality versus quantity. Of course, we're not looking for you to just take everything you've written in the paper and drop that into a PowerPoint slide, right? We want to kind of distill the best parts and the best strategy. And of course, you want to lead them by the nose a bit. Lead me by the nose as the client, point person. You want to tell a story from slide to slide. Of course, attention to detail, it goes without saying, but I've given you guys a hall pass on some of the stuff you've written over the semester here, but in this case here, I'm going to be pretty litigious about your writing. And so you want to make sure you don't have any spelling errors or anything like that, grammar errors and stuff like that. So be careful there. And don't be afraid to insert some personality. I like this one, certainly. And I encourage you guys, if you want to, for example, we have had people present the Vans brand in the past, and they've come out wearing Vans shirts and Vans shoes. I think that's a neat way to show alignment and exuberance for the brand. So you can do that. I'm not expecting you guys to dress up like in suits necessarily, but I'd like you to show, insert your personality into the presentations, not only in your dress, but also in kind of how you present the material. And why is that? Because advertising is a creative industry at the end of the day. Even though this is media planning and buying, it's not the copywriting side or the creative side necessarily, although I would say there's some creativity involved here as well. So don't be afraid to let your hair down a little bit and be creative. All right, so those are some tips there. And again, like I said, we're going to go through more of this next class period. But let's talk about Chapter 10 here quickly, Evaluating the Media Plan. This is from our main book here. And so there will be a quiz, like I mentioned, on Thursday on this. So you want to try to read that beforehand. Some topics here, evaluating the media plan. How do we evaluate? And that's important, right? So you don't make the same mistakes, and conversely, you capitalize on the things that worked well when you do this a second time and a third time and beyond. 4 ways to evaluate a media plan. So we'll talk about those 4. There's something called a pre-plan analysis, a post-buy analysis, and of course we'll talk a bit about custom consumer research and ROI impact. So these are all in this chapter. So a good friend there, John Wanamaker, again, he said half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. It's a good setup for what we're going to talk about here in measurement. And back in the day, we were not allowed much latitude there with regard to measurement. So we have the opposite problem now. We have more information than we can probably shake a stick at. So the challenge there is to kind of get to the key parts and show success wherever possible. All right, so one way to ensure your clients' dollars are not wasted is to evaluate the media plan before and during the launch. So even beforehand, you'll have some idea what works and what doesn't work based on past campaigns and past projects, and even research you've done based on the client's target audience, et cetera, et cetera. But know that evaluating is ongoing largely before, during, and after. Advertisers will often make some changes to the plan while it's running, so that has happened every time I've ever ran any plan, and usually it's can you spend less money? But obviously things change as you go forward here, so you got to be flexible that way as well. And that will change obviously how you evaluate the plan in some cases. Here's some reasons. Consumer response. Obviously, if you got a negative response or maybe a positive response that you want to tweak, first thing you want to focus on is how are your target customers reacting to the campaign at hand. And if it's a negative thing, you've got to kind of flip that and fix that. Product improvements, and sometimes midstream here you get changes to the product, so that will then, of course, cause a change in the plan potentially. New challenges or new channels rather of distribution. Sometimes a new channel comes up suddenly, and one example of this is in midstream when I was doing some work. We managed to land Home Depot with our products, and that changed everything. So most of my budget went from one thing or several things to all 100% supporting a Home Depot launch in that same period. So know that can happen. Competitive pricing strategies. Of course, you might get a company come in who has a sharp price on something, so you've got to kind of react to that in the moment, and that might change the plan. And of course, economic trends, as we know, '08 was a huge downturn. There's probably one or two in our future, I would assume. But either way, if something, if you know what hits the fan, you have to kind of react. And oftentimes it's scaling back. So there are 4 ways the book talks about to evaluate a media plan. First is to analyze how well a medium or plan performed in achieving desired reach and frequency. So my best example is we used to do a lot of direct mail, including a lot of like card mailers. And after a period of time, I just realized that nothing we did was working. So, that was an easy decision for me to make, to kind of remove that and plunk that money into other things, like, for example, digital. Post-buy analysis, checking to make sure ads ran as scheduled. So now as a starting out person, you'll do a lot of this stuff, as Kay mentioned in our recent meeting with her. So that's a post-buy analysis, checking to make sure ads ran as scheduled. The third thing you do is research the consumer impact of the media and or marketing plan. So how were they behaving beforehand? How are they behaving afterwards? And a lot of that's done through social media measurement and other means. The last thing is, of course, to analyze the return on the investment of the plan, and we'll talk more about how to do that. Let's first talk about pre-plan analysis. The first time to evaluate the impact of the immediate plan is before it is presented to the client. So you've got some good ideas on what's going to work and what's not going to work based on your target audience. And that's, again, why it's so important for us to understand them in grave detail. So that you know then, by extension, your recommendations on how they index. So you want a positive index number, as we've discussed, and SK has discussed as well, but obviously anything over 100, like say north of 110 is a very strong, or at least a good idea to consider. The media specialist, which is kind of the opening person, the starting out person, must determine which vehicles and what amount of each of them will lead to meeting their client's goals. And I wanted to mention this too. Computer systems and tools are available, writ large, to help with our analysis there. All right, so post-buy analysis, a little bit different. Obviously, it's after the fact. You spent the money already, and things have happened. So how did that go? First thing you want to do is just make sure the ads ran, and that's what we talked about in class. Obviously, traditional media, you get things like tear sheets and other examples of that. And as Kay mentioned, there are also ways to do that digitally. So you want to make sure the ads that ran as they were planned to be run. They also must determine how well the plan delivered on its goals. So how do you do that? And there's different ways for different media. So here's some things to do. There are syndicated data that can be used to help determine if you meet these goals. So Nielsen for TV, as we know, Nielsen's the only game in town, frankly. So Nielsen does a great job of that. Nielsen Audio for radio, also. So if you got a radio campaign as a part of your larger plan, you can use Nielsen Audio. MRI for print, and I would also add Simmons to that, and ComScore for digital are the big ones. These are all the tools you'll need to answer your questions regarding reach and frequency. All right, so there's also ways to get at what's going on by doing custom consumer research. And any of you folks who will find themselves next semester or next year in the capstone project will be doing some of this stuff here. But obviously we want to understand kind of from the consumer's point of view what's going on with the campaign. So it's important. Why? Because it helps determine whether you or your client got what it was paid for, first. Second point is you'll get to see whether the plan worked as intended through consumer research. And finally, it also provides invaluable help in preparing for next year's plan. So you'll be able to fine-tune, and obviously you do this for multiple years. You make tweaks as you go forward, but it's always important to get feedback from the consumer. So you can do this either quantitatively or qualitatively, like using focus groups or using surveys. So either way. And again, 423, the capstone project, you'll do probably a bit of both. Okay, so ROI, as we know, stands for return on investment. So what's the return on investment? I spent X, I got Y. Is that netting positive for me? And are we seeing a positive lift based on the spend? So there are complex statistical models that analyze many of the marketing mix variables as possible. These models attempt to isolate as many variables, but the whole goal here is to see what's working and what's not from a money standpoint. Without evaluating media plans, it's just like you're making the same mistakes over and over again, and you're not helping anybody. All right, so that's a quick down and dirty on Chapter 10, Enough to be Dangerous. I do recommend you read this anyway. this article in spite of my quick lecture here, just to get a better feel for what's going on. And obviously, if you're an advertising person wanting to get into the field, it's important for you to know this information. I want to pivot, talk about the IMC planning process quickly, just so we get a feel for this. This is a nice slide here that I took from 220. You may have recognized this picture, but I think it does a nice job of articulating what's before you guys right now if you haven't started working on your final projects yet. So something called context first. So nice alliteration there. Context, customers, competitors, and communication rather are the 3 C's underneath context there. Customers, obviously knowing who you're targeting, competitors who are vying for those same customers, and then of course, how do you go to market? How are your competitors communicating, and what's your plan? What's your overarching campaign idea or concept? Now you see there product positioning. We'll talk a bit about that as well, but one thing we do, and not as much in media planning and buying, that's more the marketing piece, but how is your product positioned in the marketplace? And who is your target? And we'll talk about objectives next. Of course, that's also super important. What are you gonna do? What's that thing you're gonna hope to improve upon? Whether it's increase sales by 2%, or drive more traffic to your website, or maybe increase store traffic. The list goes on and on. But what are your objectives specifically based on what you've learned about the campaign and about the client? The last 2 pieces there on the right-hand column, budget and IMC components. So how do you intend to spend the money? Where is it going to go? And then I would say IMC component could also be rolled up into what's the schedule for the year. So I will ask you to do that as well for this project. So effective IMC campaign planning starts with establishing quality communication objectives that tie the organization's context, target markets, and positioning. So that's an important piece here, and it really comes down to what's in the center there, the communications objectives. So we've kind of touched on this already, but kind of these are the big hitters here for our goals when we build these campaigns. As I mentioned before, we get our orders, our marching orders, from the marketing objectives and a marketing plan. So the marketing team more than likely will hand over what the objectives are, and this is a list of some of those here, right? The big buckets here with the arrow, inside the arrow there are sales volume increases, market share increases, profits, our return on investment are all important factors to consider. To the right there, how do you tie those marketing objectives to communication objectives? Okay, so any one of these bullets can be something you can draw upon for your plans, but develop a brand awareness could be one, increasing category demand, changing consumer attitudes. Maybe sometimes you've got a situation where the brand has not been favorably viewed upon by consumers recently, so maybe the goal here is to kind of change that. A good example of that would be Domino's Pizza, when they admitted openly after consumer research that their pizza tasted like wet cardboard and their sauce tasted like ketchup. Not a positive thing, but they managed to turn that around and create a campaign that then, of course, drove a positive response. So I'm not going to read all of these here, but you get the idea. We're looking for you to kind of take let's say sales volume increase, right? Or market share increase. Those are 2 common ones, or maybe increasing profits. But the first 2 primarily, I would say increasing sales volume or market share. And then what are some communication objectives you're going to hang your hat on? So the last thing I would say about this is try to come up with a number. Be specific on your communication objectives. So if you're trying to develop brand awareness, say I'm increasing brand awareness by 5% or 10%. You're kind of making up a number there a little bit, but be realistic about it. Don't say 90% because that's not realistic. So generally 5 to 10% is a really big swing. All right, so we've talked a lot about different kind of things in IMC, and I don't want you to. The main thing I want you here to do, you guys to remember, is that we've talked about a lot of different tactics, and I've given you an unlimited budget, which we'll talk more about as well. Now, the only thing I'll say about the budget is prove to me that what you spend is going to make more money or have a more positive impact. So the value is going to be there. In other words, I'm going to spend X, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z. But here are some things that you guys should think about. Now, traditional advertising, radio, TV, print, out of home are all the traditional kind of players there. I don't want you to think outside of that. I'd like you to at least consider some of these as well as part of your planning. Now, some of the brands may actually be focused more on experiential. I get that, but nonetheless, for the purposes of this class and for the fact that I'm looking for you to make recommendations regarding your plan and your client, I'd like you to kind of consider some of these traditional advertising pieces as well. And the examples I've shared with you guys have done that pretty well, I would think. Trade promotions, of course, consumer promotions, all that stuff could roll up into your tactical recommendations here with your plans. So have fun with that. But think outside the box. this is where when you meet with your teams after assignment 7 gets turned in and you guys kind of spitball together, this is where those good ideas can come through. Media spending, of course, how much you're going to spend. Alternative media spending, so things like digital, social, mobile, etc., and even business-to-business media spending is important. We talked a while about experiential stuff, so getting out in the field and seeing customers face-to-face, I think is critically important these days, and that's a growing market as well, so don't lose sight of that. And by extension, I would say, getting the product into the hands of your customers. If you've got a new thing that's getting launched, if somebody, like for example, did Coke, and Coke's got some new products coming out now, so you could tie, these experiential event marketing pieces with product giveaways. Of course, we've also talked a lot about product placement and products becoming a part of the storyline in marketing. So I don't want you to lose sight of that either. And the last one here, WOM stands for word of mouth, as we know. And word of mouth marketing is also important. That's where you kind of get involved with influencers and your talented 1%ers who would take a bullet for your brand. How do you unlock the power of word of mouth using your 1%ers? All right, so I mentioned the budget. Obviously, they're based on a few things. So what you do every year is what I've done every year is we've always had benchmark measures. So I'd get a budget, I'd spend that money, and I would produce results, and I'd show kind of what happened. So that's the first thing I want to mention to you. That's the starting point. But every year, that will probably be modified based on what happened the first or second or third year. Budgets are largely based on either communication objectives or marketing objectives, and they vary from consumer to B2B markets. B2B is more heavily focused on trade journals and telemarketing, and obviously in most cases here we're doing B2C, so it's more likely to include TV, magazines, and the internet, etc. So a lot larger sort of swath of different things to choose from. And I think like most of us are doing B2C here, so don't leave anything on the table. All right, I wanted to share this quickly with you guys, just a couple slides, maybe 5 or 10 slides on a plan that I did some time ago for home standby generators for Briggs & Stratton. So this is a picture I actually took. I staged this outside a home. We were looking for a home that had the perfect, it took a while to find a place like this, but obviously that's one of our smaller generators there, and our positioning was the smallest, most powerful generator on the market. At the time it was. So that's kind of why that was important as well. So I'm going to go through this here. This will give you an idea kind of professionally, and this is a little bit dated, but I think still relevant. I'd feel pretty proud of this even today if I had to go out and launch something like this. So I think that it still holds up over time. So one thing I did is I created a microsite or a landing page, and I had a short, memorable URL, powernow.com. And we used that in all of our material and all of our promotions to drive to one spot. And why is that? Because landing pages give you a lot of data. And we know quickly then how much is what's working, what's not working. So I had, if I did a radio ad and drove it to Power Now, I would know that that ad drove X number of traffic to my website. And of course, the landing page itself was built to capture leads, and that was the whole point of PowerNow.com. Now we had BriggsandStratton.com, but we wanted to focus on this landing page, which drove leads specifically to us in a meaningful way. We also wanted to create buzz in various areas. The primary target was the consumer. Secondarily, we wanted also to get traction with retail, which and media and industry and internal. So there was PR aspects to this and other things like that. But our primary target was obviously creating awareness for consumers. Our target audience had a lot of money, obviously $200K plus, combined household income of 150 plus, and generally it was males. This is an older one, but after a while we realized it was males with we had females as being strong influencers based on what we learned through our research. So know that we started with that. So our plan writ large, and you'll do this as well. What's your overarching strategy? Our plan was to time everything to coincide with seasons that have propensity to bring adverse weather. So wintertime and summertime, primarily around hurricane season in the winter, or in the summer rather, and then ice storms around the wintertime. So we had cutting edge, eye-catching, user interactive digital banner creative wherever applicable. So we did a lot of digital. Just because that's where people go first. If they're able to, if the power's on, they'll go and search for a solution. So we wanted to be there for them the minute they searched for power outage problem or any kind of such word there. So our goal is to have a big footprint online, and that's kind of what we talked about. So how do we do that? We had some vehicles to suggest weather content sites. We did a lot of pay-per-click or pay-per-view, pay-per-click rather, keywords using Google and Overture. But obviously now, if I had my druthers, I would just do Google. Overture is no longer existent, to my knowledge. DIYer and home sites. We knew that people with old homes wanted to renovate, and obviously adding a generator is something you could do easily. And then home building, new home builders is another bucket that we targeted. So homebuilder.com, home store, home plans, anything related to that. We also, so that's weather. So we want to talk about weather. Let's talk about that first. So we targeted weather.com, which is a big website, and WeatherBug, two of the biggest, right, at the time. And I'm sure these numbers are much, much bigger now. But obviously between the two, there's a 1-2 punch for us. Anytime weather junkies went online, they would be exposed to an ad for our generator. So that made a lot of sense for us, and they hit our target pretty perfectly. Skewed Men, weather.com and WeatherBug. Obviously, there's some information there. And 70% of those folks own their own home, so we wanted to have as many people owning their own home as possible. So they're the ones who can take charge and make a decision about putting a generator in their home. Average income was a little lower than we discussed, but nonetheless on point, and the average ages are pretty good. Here's examples of these. And then we did also search engines, right? So we picked keywords, generator, power generator, and other words as well. And these were expensive words, but we wanted to enjoy that space as much as possible. So we buying the keywords, we wanted to pop up, on the first page when people searched for these words. It wasn't cheap, but we, like I mentioned before, there was low penetration, so nobody really owned that space. Generac was our competitor, a main competitor at the time, and so we had to battle that. So we had a pay-per-click campaign to kind of really be in the conversation when people went on search. Here are the three big ones. We had This Old House and DIYNet and Bob Vila were our three big DIYer home sites. And again, these are folks who, fix up their house. And so one message could be then, you should fix it up with backup power. Bob Vila was great. Bob Vila, I don't know if you know who he is, but back in the day, he was very popular. I think he's since fallen off a bit, but Bob Vila had a show and getting mentions there, both on his show and on his website, were important. Here's some research. We were involved heavily in home building as well. Now that was never coalesced or never became a big thing for us, unfortunately. In big part because of the '08 housing crisis, but nonetheless, we saw an opportunity to build our products into an existing home plan. So we wanted to be in the conversation with builders, basically. So we did a lot there to kind of create awareness for our products with home builders. And by extension, they would, of course, then pass that along to their consumers as an option, along with Corian countertops and other kind of selections. So obviously being online is important. Homeplans.com was one place we looked at. Home building, offline. So that's an advertisement there. So that's kind of it. Those were our 4 buckets, areas we targeted. And all of those, of course, were geared to target our target audience in a meaningful way. Now, I'm going to ask you guys to do this as well. Obviously, this is a calendar of sorts here, high level. And this kind of covers everything we talked about. So this is a simple example that you want to do for your campaigns as well. What are you going to do? And why? And when? So look at each of those. Here's an example of some of the banners, which I look back on now, and I think, gosh, are they ever atrocious? But nonetheless, this was a draft of something, so we ended up with something a little bit better maybe. But ad banners, because we're doing a lot of digital. And I think I mentioned this. I'll quickly talk about this. Our big goal here was lead generation because people don't buy these products right away, so we want to just get their email and have a conversation with them. So we had a seeding campaign where we just went on key markets and owned the space online as much as possible in those 4 buckets we talked about. Then that's something also called the trigger market. So whenever the power went out, we had a heavy up focus on those markets. So I had a little extra money in my hip pocket that I could pull out and spend in those markets. So this is kind of how it broke out. I had some budget reserved for trigger campaigns, and we had local radio, direct mail, local telemarketing, and neighborhood yard advertising, and other things to support our dealers, like a referral program, and again, just supporting our dealers locally was a part of our trigger campaign. So the minute the power went out in some town, or location, we were out there with our dealers and we're dropping these ads. Of course, seeding is just in case, right? Knowing hot markets and being out in those hot markets with print, online, radio, and Yellow Pages. Back then, Yellow Pages was still kind of relevant at that point. And then any collateral stuff. So we had just a lot of stuff that were out in the markets that we thought were going to be viable. Another example of a campaign, and this is a way you want to think about how you lay this out. So quickly you can get a quick glance when you're presenting this to your client. Another example of that, again, for national online campaigns and some of the keywords we used. And this is the web ad piece here. We've already seen this. This is interesting. So we knew kind of where the where the power went out. So we had this thing called DOT tracking, daily outage tracking. That really, really was great. I would get a daily report on where the power went out, so I could then sit down at my desk and begin and get on the phone and start making plans for those markets. And these green circles here are places where in that year where outages had happened to some degree. Now the key thing there was it long enough? If you had a short outage or like a little blip, it's not enough. It's got to be more protracted for it to be valuable. But that's kind of what I did once I had this all planned out. Florida was a big market for us as well, so I mentioned radio as being a big thing here, and it's still big. So we worked with this company here, and we were able to make a very focused, efficient buy, and we were able to drop ads in all of these markets here in Florida. Okay, so that's quick down and dirty on a campaign I did, 10 years ago for Briggs & Stratton. I did this every year, and every year it kind of improved or modified based on what I learned from the previous year. So just know that it's not a perfect science, but you've got to be mindful and, of course, always be measuring and tweaking. So another campaign I want to share with you guys a little bit different here. More recently, I did this in the last 5 years. I started a company down in Chicago, as you guys may know, with a few other folks. And one of the companies that we launched was called UpDog. So I have pride and authorship of this. In fact, I came up with the idea when I had seen another company called BarkBox doing this. You may have heard of them, but our goal was to kind of upseat BarkBox and take some of that share because it was a wide open market at the point, the subscription service market. So UpDog was the brand I came up with, which I think is kind of cool. You've heard the joke, "What's up, dog?" Well, I don't know what's up with you is kind of the joke there. So kind of fun conversation starter of sorts, but we were targeting dog families. So I'm going to give you some examples of some slides that I pulled together back in the beginning when I was pitching this. Pets are now a part of the family, which is kind of one of those insights we talk about, right? So the fact that dogs are now almost like a family member, and that's how our dog is, and maybe you've got a pet as well, and you notice that same thing. So attitudes about pets have changed over the years. Now they're more treated like humans, and you'll see some spending information coming up here on that. They spend more on their dogs in some cases than their own human companions. So new animal care products, new animal care services, prices are secondary. So why the change? Okay, so obviously dog owners in the U.S. have increased. Now there's 83 million based on what I uncovered from my research back in the day. So it was a few years ago. So I'm sure that's increased. I think dog ownership has increased over the years. And again, I used BarkBox as kind of a litmus test for what we were going to be doing, but in the short period of time, BarkBox was able to kind of get a large number of subscriptions, so over 200,000. And that was just, according to what we see, is just scratching the surface based on what we see here. So this is just 2%, less than 1% rather of market penetration. So very low penetration for this at-home delivery piece. So there, we realized that there was a room for another brand in the space. So I've asked you also to think about painting a picture of your target audience. And we've named our target audience dog parents because they treat their dogs like human beings. So here's graphically what you want to do here. And you can show pictures like this just to kind of prove a point that people treat their dogs like better than other humans in some cases, which is kind of phenomenal. Some facts about the dog parent buying behavior. The average dog or cat owner spends between $200 and $300 annually on food for their pet. And I bet that's low. So lots of money gets spent on these dogs. So that's from 2014. Dog parents are 65% of all dog owners treat their dogs like family, like I mentioned. So that's a large number. So that's vetted out through a research piece I found online. Credible resource there. Other facts that you could latch onto. Again, these are insights. 48% let them sleep in their bed. 23% let them their pet lay on the furniture. And 38% are more likely to take their pet with them on trips. And they even allocate a budget, so they think about spending money on their dog in the future, which is not something a lot of people do, rather. And they're also likely to buy gifts spontaneously, which I'm guilty of as well. So this is a snapshot again. I'm using BarkBox. BarkBox is a way of a Bible almost for how to go in and break into this market, and they were enormously successful with their products and services toward this end. So they start with just $100,000 of startup money only and 3 employees, and they had 20,000 submissions in the first year. In other words, subscriptions. So hugely successful from 2012 to present. So we just saw a lot of opportunity. So how do we differentiate ourselves? So that's the key here. In UpDog, we wanted to kind of create a little bit of a different feel with our brand. Obviously, UpDog's a little bit more humorous, so we wanted to kind of create a brand voice. So this is important, not maybe for media planning and buying, but I think it's important to talk about the target audience in this way. So, what's the message we want to take, or what the brand voice we want to use? And so we wanted to have some fun with this. And so this picture here is a campaign that we ran where we had people take pictures of themselves with their dogs. And so, obviously it's a contest to say, do you look like your dog? And in a lot of cases we do. It's kind of funny how similar I look to my dog, but it's weird how that works out. So that was kind of fun. But that's kind of in keeping with our larger brand voice. Another example of that again here. I love this. Just a little turbulence, folks. Actually, I'm a dog, so we're all going to die. So the brand voice in social media communicates our personality, and that's kind of the approach we took with social media. So, we talk about USPs as well and in other classes, but unique selling proposition. So our tagline was because dogs rule, and that's kind of the thing we wanted to go out to market with. Some USP ideas, the things that help us sell against the competition, BarkBox and others. So we realized that there were lots of families that had more than one dog, and I think I've asked you guys this already, but maybe not. If you've had more than one dog, and lots of people do have more than one dog. So we realized that was a market that was underserved. So we created products that would satisfy families that had more than one dog. So we had bigger boxes and a lot more stuff and charged more, obviously, but we were focused on becoming the multi-dog family champion in our space. Other things, high quality, unique items, focus on organic stuff, and it's kind of the other thing too. A lot of companies like BarkBox included would put low cost, kind of not the greatest products. So we wanted to focus on higher end stuff. So we were kind of trying to take the high road, and we were going to be more expensive and mindfully so. So, obviously that was the goal here, and there's some of the things that set us apart from our competition. We also knew where our targets were. This is just a simple thing as to show where the most dog families were. So most families, 1 through 10 here, Arkansas, New Mexico, Kentucky, Missouri. Now I'm surprised Wisconsin's not on there, but they're somewhere in the middle. Either way, we knew which states to target, so that was important. Some IMC components. We had alternative media spending, so we did digital, social, mobile. We also had distribution partners that helped us sell the products. We did a lot of email too, so direct mail is expensive, but email is not nearly as expensive. So we had an email list and we targeted to those folks. Did a lot of word of mouth, and we gave away free boxes. Anytime somebody bought a box, if they told 5 friends, we'd give them a free box. So that's an easy way to make folks talk about it, and of course enabled. We talk about the word of mouth, right? So we enabled that through Facebook as well, so people would share that with their Facebook friends and family. We also had a relationship with PR through Pause in Chicago, which is a big company, a big not-for-profit that we wanted to be aligned with. So we had some success there. And we had a training video as well, not an informational video that we created. I'm not going to play this for you, but if you wish, I will share this with you guys. It's about 1.5 minutes long. I kind of wrote the script and produced it using some tools I have at my disposal. But we created a character, and that's UpDog there. And the video itself is pretty cool. I'll make sure to show that you guys in class on Thursday. All right, so that's it for this lecture here. I'm not sure how long it went, but it probably went pretty long. Either way, we're covering a lot of ground here, so we can have some time to focus and catch up on Thursday. You should try to read chapters 12 and 13 in the Young Book, because we're going to go over those on Thursday. That should be pretty quick. And then, of course, you'll have some time to work on your final projects. We do have a reading quiz on Thursday, which is not listed here, but be ready for that. That's on chapter 10. Okay, with that, I'll sign off. Thanks a lot for the time. Sorry we weren't able to meet today. We will see you guys all on Thursday.